I'm delighted to welcome Cormac Dolan, Northern Ireland Manager for Nature-Friendly Farming Network, to the Danske Bank NI head office here in Belfast today. Knowledge sharing is a key part of our sustainability strategy, so we're delighted to partner up with Nature-Friendly Farming for this series of discussions with local farmers on how nature is engaged with their farm businesses. So Cormac, who can we expect up first today?
Thanks for having us, Paul. It's great to be here. I'm really looking forward to talking to a range of guests we're going to have through this series. This morning we're going to have Helen and Chris and Chris Shannon, and we're going to be talking about innovation.
Listen, we hope you really enjoy this series of discussions and can get some great information from them. Thank you.
Hello and welcome to the first episode of the Nature-Friendly Farming podcast. I'm Cormac Dolan. I'm the Northern Ireland Manager for the Nature-Friendly Farming Network. We're a farmer-led organisation striving to restore the balance between farming and nature. We work with our members to help provide knowledge exchange events on farms, as well as doing lovely events like this, where we're talking to farmers and hearing about the things that can help to change and improve our farming system for a resilient future. Thanks to Danske Bank for hosting us here in their lovely building and sponsoring our series of knowledge exchange as well through this summer. So keep an eye out on the website, on the social media to get yourself to those. Membership is free for the NFFN, so why not join our community? I'm here today with Chris Shannon and Helen and Chris, and I'm delighted to talk about innovation and the room for it in the farming system here in Northern Ireland. Helen farms in Tyrone, in just outside Cookstown, with the main output being fibre flax in a crop rotation. Yeah. And you work with Charlie under the name Malin Linen.
That's right, Malin.
Yeah. And I'll let you talk a bit more about that, but to say also you work on the Water Innovation Network with Chris, trying to find win-wins for farmers and for nature in terms of keeping the nutrient balance on farms and protecting water quality. And with Chris Shannon here too. Chris is the co-founder of Stardium, software company that helps to modernise how organisations can support entrepreneurs. And you're also the co-founder of Venture Folk, which delivers projects that tackle social, economic and environmental challenges. So I think I couldn't really ask for better guests to talk about innovation, and having talked to you both about it before, I know that there's an infectious enthusiasm, so I'm looking forward to having this conversation. But maybe we'll start with just letting you guys introduce yourselves a bit more and speaking a bit about where you're coming from and what sort of brings you to do what you do. Helen, can you give us a bit about your farming history and what's taken you to where you are?
Sure, I'll kick off, and I can talk about how we encountered each other over the years. So, as you say, our farm's in County Tyrone, and it's mostly flax these days. In the past, it would have been a mixed farm, and then it went to being dairy for a while, and then had a suckler herd when we took over. And now we're sort of bringing it back into a mixed system. My day job, though, has for years and years and years been working in and around sort of supporting entrepreneurship. I'm particularly keen on looking at how we innovate and how we create a culture of innovation. So over the years I've worked a lot with different businesses, particularly working universities, working with student-led startups, and that's a real passion of mine. It's such a vibrant environment to work in, and I'm working every day with these really exciting startups in all kinds of different subject areas, and the high-tech things and the med-tech and, all of these different very exciting things. And it was through that work that I encountered Chris, because he was at the time working in entrepreneurship in Ulster University, wasn't it? So do you want to take over from there, Chris?
Sure, yeah. I guess my background was I grew up working at a very young age in a family business, and unfortunately seen those businesses close. And that really gave me a fascination in business, what makes it work, what makes it not work. So that really was the start of where my career, I guess, has went to the past 15 years working really inside entrepreneurial ecosystems, supporting entrepreneurial ecosystems, and led to the creation of Stardium, which is where I like to think of it, the digital infrastructure in an entrepreneurial ecosystem, and in Venture Folk, which is more like the soft infrastructure, the programs, the projects, the people, the connections, the knowledge. And both of those sort of work side by side. And so I'm pretty immersed in that entrepreneurial ecosystem space, but what led Helen and I to work together then was our paths crossed when we were both doing similar projects in that way, Helen's a co-founder of Venture Folk, and we have delivered programs that overlap the sort of the farming and the entrepreneurship over the past sort of 4 or 5 years.
Yeah.
And that's included working with councils, universities, community voluntary groups to really try and get that intersection of entrepreneurship, innovation and farming.
Yeah. I think it's important to say why this is relevant to farming as well, because it was one of the things that really occurred to me, having worked with Chris and lots of other people in that kind of entrepreneurship / innovation space. I just could not kind of get my head around why we aren't using those same techniques in farming so much, and it's really interesting then when you start thinking about all the stuff we do with startups all the time. What happens if you actually do that on a farm? Because that's when, all these kind of, that's what led us down the path of doing the crazy flax stuff and let's put an orchard in, and it really helps in terms of just thinking about your farm business.
So do you think there's kind of differentiation between the two worlds then? We all know that farms have to be run as a business, but perhaps the business world and that sort of experimentation, you don't regularly see it as much in the farming world?
Yeah, I think so. We tend to sort of keep farming in the same way a lot, and I think we as farmers are really good at innovation, right? Anybody who works on a farm can turn their hand to almost anything, are great problem solvers. So on a daily basis, innovation happens like all the time on a farm. We're really good at that kind of instant stuff. Where I think we're missing it is that sort of ecosystem. It's the wider system of farming that really we could do a lot more, I think, to shift and change and be ahead of the curve there. So it's at that kind of system level, and that's the thing we're really interested in working on, I suppose. And particularly Chris does a huge amount of work with universities on how to create these kind of systems that support innovation. So I think we're great at doing it on our own, but we need to create that kind of bigger picture stuff.
Yeah, and maybe the term itself isn't what somebody thinks they're doing, perhaps, when they're engaging in something, because we've spoke before about how innovation, maybe people think shiny new machines or shiny new software, but innovation can be a range of things, and we've seen that in a lot of your projects, Helen, with Source Grow or Veg Collective. Do you want to tell us maybe a wee bit about that?
It's so true. I mean, when we talk of innovation, you instantly think it's technology.
Yeah, you think it's invention, but it's not necessarily the case.
No, absolutely. It can be a new business model, a different approach. It can be different processes. There's lots of different ways that innovation happens, and I think especially in farming, technology is important, of course, but there's lots of other things we can do to be more innovative, maybe planting different crops and things like that. What we did with the likes of Source Grow and Veg Collective and so on, what we really focused on there was how can we shift the supply chain, really, so instead of selling our stuff to somebody else, to the end user, how can we shorten that supply chain so that, stuff is going from the farm straight to the customer, and that's and there's loads of ways that you can do that, but so Source Grow was one of those that was getting food from farms into restaurants. Veg Collective was groups of farms coming together to do veg boxes going straight to customers, but the principle is the same, and to be honest, it's similar with the flax as well. All of those are based on, can we shorten that supply chain? So innovation can be technology, but it can also be, let's reinvent the supply chain or have a completely different business model.
Yeah, and do things differently. Change really is the driver for innovation, yeah. And for me, I think if taking innovation and entrepreneurship, and you mentioned there about is it similar to business, to me, farming is the purest form of entrepreneurship. Yeah. If I like to use the definition for an entrepreneurship is the pursuit of opportunities to create value, and that value could be social value, commercial value, environmental value. But the bit that I really like is they do that by mobilising resources that may initially actually be beyond their control. And if that's not a description of what a farmer does every day, what is? So I think the overlap there between innovation and entrepreneurship space, which we're familiar in, familiar with, and then the draw of what actually farmers do on a daily basis. It happens, but so often we see, and this is the same across many sectors, is that innovation needs time and headspace to actually give that opportunity to grow and to pursue those opportunities. And that's something that, particularly in the pharma space, if you're working on tight margins, if you're in survival mode, your focus isn't on innovation, it's on surviving. And I think that's the difference here, where we're interested in systems that make that happen, that provide that space or those incentives to actually allow someone to take that time to focus on what's next.
Yeah, I think that makes so much sense. It's if you're firefighting or thinking about just keeping yourself afloat, it doesn't create that space for creativity. Do you think there's a bit of a cultural thing there too, maybe historically, with aiming for a specialisation and efficiency? Perhaps we've, through culturally in farming, perhaps there's a drive for uniformity and maybe not an appreciation of being different and finding a niche that maybe you could do yourself and seeing that as valuable.
Yeah, I mean, I certainly think, we know that in a healthy sort of innovative culture, the people who take risks are celebrated, and even if you fail, it's just seen as learning. You're creating that kind of atmosphere where it's okay to just have a go at something, and you're not seen as the crazy in the corner. Exactly. It's an okay thing, and what you're celebrating people who try stuff. And I don't know if we have that particularly within our farming culture until somebody proves it. Once somebody proves it and says, yeah, I've tried this other thing and it's really successful, then we all go, yes, well done. Mm-hmm. But when somebody just goes, I'm going to try something different, we all tend to sit back and go, Yeah. On you go. We'll all watch you, and that means for somebody to take a punt and do something a bit different, you're left feeling very exposed, aren't you?
Yeah, the fear of failure is in every ecosystem, every entrepreneurial ecosystem, and I think it's that comes back to culture and creating that space and the incentive to actually take those risks. Rewarding outcomes, not compliance, and being able to actually say, we need, in terms of sustainability, like some of the work we have done with some farms has been on succession planning. And I think that's what's really interesting from me, coming from what most people would think of a business to farming as a business. So they're generational thinkers. They're thinking beyond just the 10-year period, because not only is it the business, it's where they live, it's part of their family, it's maybe been there for generations. I think that long-term thinking is where there's many things that entrepreneurship can learn from farming, as well as vice versa in terms of innovation from there too. Even just like, there's so many things that happen. We're both obsessed with biomimicry and how actually nature tells us what to do. Yeah. And that's fascinating. And there's so much within innovation that can be taken from how nature does that. The recycling of nutrients back into the farm. That's, how do you take businesses that have maybe not achieved their initial goal, can be recycled back in that talent into an ecosystem to start new companies. So I think there's so many similarities there that we talk about that a lot.
Yeah, I love that imagery that you're bringing with it there too. So we're here and we're talking about innovation. Maybe just give us a run through, Helen, as a farmer, as to why it's so important for farming.
Well, I mean, from our own point of view on our own farm, we, I suppose, found ourselves in that situation of, looking at the farm, thinking, neither of us were working full time on the farm. We were both having to have off-farm jobs because the farm wasn't paying enough to keep us both there full time, and we were kind of hating it. We were hating farming. We were hating the not having enough money to do it the way you would want to do it. Constantly firefighting, fixing fences and the hedge. Just this constant kind of. It just didn't feel great where we were at, and it was really necessity driven innovation at that point, where we just felt we have to do something differently here. It just seemed crazy that we've got this asset. Surely there has to be a different way of managing this that would be better. So that's where our kind of necessity-driven innovation came from. We just had to look for other things that we could do, and really, we came up with a few different things that we've tried, which we can talk about later. But it felt difficult. It felt like that innovation wasn't being hugely supported. It felt like we were the kind of weird people in the corner trying to do something different, and it was hard, doing that. And I just think, there's, coming from the world that we both work in, there's a better system that's more supportive of people who want to try and do things a little bit differently.
Yeah, and I think if we look at why does innovation happen in what people would see as a traditional business in the corporate world, it happens to try and will make the business more resilient, to diversify income, to open new opportunities, explore new ideas, and all of those things are the reason and justification as to why farming also should be looking to innovation for the resilience of the business, the succession of the business, the long-term viability of it, the revenue streams. And I think it's just about how do we learn from both farming, learn from the innovation ecosystem and how that happens in the corporate world, but vice versa. I think there's so many different things that we can learn from natural ecosystems that can bring into entrepreneurship ecosystems.
And a big one of those is diversity.
Totally.
Where, that was one of the things that really I could not get my head around with the farm, was where everybody's kind of doing the same thing. And, if we can find something, if we can just find the thing that not everybody else is doing, surely that's where, where there's more money potentially. And so deliberately looking for the thing that not everybody else is doing, surely brings more diversity and therefore more resilience. So again, following nature in that,
So Chris, you'd said there about succession, and I think that's such a valuable thing to think about. And I guess collaboration that you spoke about, Helen, I think that's collaboration within families or collaboration within communities, and seeing that as a valuable thing, seeing neighbours as people that can help each other out, or seeing younger generation within a farming family as their new ideas being useful to the business. I was lucky to go to Austria a few years ago and visit some of the nature friendly farmers there through our Farming for Nature Ambassador scheme, and I was amazed that three of the 4 or 5 farms we were on, the people in charge of the farm were under 30, and their parents were still working with them, but they were the ideas people, and they were coming up with all sorts of wacky things, and it was brilliant. And you could see that the parents were excited about it. They maybe had, I'm sure there was plenty of friction that we weren't seeing, but I thought that was so exciting to see that encouragement of creativity, and that encouragement of taking the reins a wee bit, and I'm interested to maybe hear a bit more about that sort of succession, how you find that here, and have you seen a bit of resistance maybe in passing things on into forms of control?
So often we see that those who have not been told no many times are the ones who will have the ambition and the desire to create something new, because they haven't already cut themselves off in terms of innovating, because they've already tried that once before. So it's interesting you say the younger generation there who do it, and that comes through in the work we do with universities, is that they haven't got the responsibilities yet, or they haven't got that experience that would maybe stifle innovation and creative thought. So that usually does come through. In terms of succession, look, that is a challenge that farming has been dealing with for centuries, but actually we're seeing that so much more now in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. We've got 99% of our businesses here within Northern Ireland are small to micro businesses. There's a term used in the States called the silver tsunami. So many of those micro businesses are owned by people who are approaching their 60s or already approaching retirement. So what happens, those businesses that are creating jobs and wealth within our ecosystems. So this idea of succession planning, I think it's actually something that has been dealt with in the farming industry for so many years. It's something we can learn from them in an entrepreneurial ecosystem. There is definitely a lot more, again, back to the idea of the farm not just being the business, it's the family, it's the home. And I think that is what we have seen when we've been talking about succession planning, is that there's a much more complex emotional needs that come with succession planning for a farm that may not necessarily be there if you're just talking business. So I think that's a different piece.
Just when you're talking about succession planning, I think it's really interesting to think about how the nature of, the sort of longevity of your family relationship on a farm actually potentially can stifle the innovation a little bit. I was in a very different position because my dad kind of bought into farming. He didn't grow up a farmer, although his sort of wider family had been farmers, but he set up his own farm. And I grew up on that, so I had that sort of, but it was just one generation really at that stage. So, and then he sold that and went off. But we didn't have the same pressure on us then in terms of the pressure of it's a family farm and you've got this huge weight of responsibility of, keeping that going. And I think, we talk all the time about how to be truly innovative, you have to you can't have that stress on you. You need to be able to free your thinking and have the space to think creatively and to be kind of outside the business looking in, almost. When you have the weight of family history on your shoulders, it's for sure going to stifle your willingness to take a risk and your sort of creativity and what you come up with.
Yeah, understandably. And how do you think that can be tackled? I've heard you talk before about the lean launch and sort of low risk experimentation. Do you think that's a way to maybe allow people to dip their toes and trying new enterprises on a farm, or how do you think you go about taking on that challenge?
I think there's probably two things to it. There's that space bit, first of all, is, actively saying we're going to take a day away to go and think, and we'll maybe get a few people around a table and here's what we're going to sort of take time out and just imagine what if things were a bit different. And it actually takes a bit of training and a bit of thought to be able to step outside of the box really properly. We use a technique called design thinking, which is really, really useful for that, where you deliberately go through phases when you're going to just kind of, imagine you didn't have to worry about the budget.
Blue sky thinking.
You could do whatever you wanted. There's no risk of failure. And it's so freeing when you can get into that headspace. And it's unbelievable what people come up with when they have the freedom to do that.
And I think that's the challenge, that there's not always that opportunity to do that when you're in survival mode and when you're doing it. Like the famous example is, with Google, and don't worry, I'm not comparing farming to Google, but like their famous example was that they give their staff 20% of their time to every month to work on personal projects that they thought could benefit Google. Okay, so the learning from that is that actually things like Gmail came from that. Like big innovations that have now transformed that company. Now I'm very well aware that Google's a huge company with lots of resources and can afford to do that. Back to your point in terms of succession, and I think some examples that we've seen is that innovation can also be seen as the last resort, and it's only when it gets to that point where they think, well, what we've been doing so far hasn't working, we got to do something different. But it's about trying to bring that further up the lifespan of a farm, is that instead of waiting until having to do something new because nothing else is an option, and trying to bring that in earlier. And I think back to the idea of how do we incentivize that, how do we reward that, is how we're going to build sustainable, long-lasting businesses within the farm.
So the lean launch approach that we talk about, when we're working with students, quite often we'll talk to them about using lean launch, which is basically what's the minimum viable product that you can get to market so that you can test it and learn as you go from then on. Instead of, it used to be the old school way of doing it was, and we probably both worked in this, me probably more so than you, Chris, but you would have sat down and spent 3 weeks writing a business plan, and which then sat on the shelf and nobody ever looked at it again. But you had this kind of huge barrier in front of you before you ever actually even found out whether you had a customer. And nowadays, what we talk about all the time is the importance of, talking at a really early stage, get out and speak to people who might end up being your customers. And just get something as quickly as possible up and running. So when we were doing working on the Veg Collective, for example, which I mentioned earlier, And we had this notion that, we'll set up a veg box scheme. And we just went at it with a real lean launch approach. It was just sort of, we've got no budget to do this. We're just going to see what we can do with virtually nothing, not to do it on a shoestring. But, can we get a website set up? Well, yeah, we could probably do that for a few quid, and we'll set up just come up with a name, set up the social media channels. It was entirely powered by tea and tray bakes. It was just, people getting together, a cup of tea, few buns, what can we do here? And it's amazing when you get a few people who just, a sort of coalition of the willing who are all interested in doing something. And, a few cups of tea and a few tray bakes later, and we've got a lot of stuff kind of worked out. So that's lean launch, you know, really. And
I think, there's an ongoing theme here of valuing a bit of space and a bit of time. Whether you were talking about it on a large scale in a corporate world and Google doing it, or people sitting having a cup of tea and thinking about what can we do. Yeah. And I guess that's the sort of culture that we need to see there, to allow people to have that time, think of an idea, sure, if it doesn't work, do the same again. Just always have that allocated space for experimentation, and that's where you're going to get the results eventually, aren't you?
I think experimentation is a key word there, because it's about trying. And again, like from any of the farmers I've met and had the opportunity to visit, that is what they do day and daily on a micro level. It's, I guess, taking that to the higher level within the business of the farm rather than the running of the farm, and how do you apply what they exercise every single day in terms of the unique constraints that they're operating in, with the factors that are way beyond their control, weather, regulations, whatever it might be. So I think the skills and the innovation muscle is there from anybody I've had the pleasure of meeting that works on a farm. It's now actually just how do we apply that to bigger thinking for the longevity of the farm, or to diversify what we do, or to be more sustainable in terms of revenue streams, because that's ultimately the desired outcome of any innovation process.
And what do you think, I guess, what are the blockades for that now to currently, and what would be the ways past them? What would be the first steps in expanding this, throughout the sort of farming culture in Northern Ireland?
That's a $1 million question.
Well, I think there's loads of things we can do, and if if I think about the whole sort of startup world is amazing in Northern Ireland now, and 15, 20 years ago, 25, 30 years ago, people looked at people weren't coming to Northern Ireland to start businesses. It was not, you just didn't have that kind of thing. And in quite a short space of time, it's transformed completely to where Northern Ireland is now a really highly desirable place to start a business. Mm-hmm. And that's a lot to do with the sort of culture that has been created here, especially here in Belfast. And it's this kind of culture of, it's a place where, there's loads of people who do it. There's loads of people who have started these really cool businesses, and they, there's places for them to hang out together.
Much closer circles of trust as well. It's a smaller place, so it makes it easier to do that.
Yeah, and there's this kind of, there's these kind of hubs, I guess, when you think of like Catalyst and Ormo Labs, and even a lot of the banks provide that kind of support where, there's places for them to come and work together, for them to socialise together, and that's all part. And then you've got the big competitions like Invent, which are celebrating, everything.
The triers,
about,
the doers, and it's how do we bring that? I assume
what's the equivalent in farming?
Yeah.
That's the question. Where are the opportunities for people to meet and hang out in a space that's saying what you're doing is amazing, it's brilliant, celebrating the people who are putting themselves out there a little bit, the innovators, and so how do we bring that in more?
And I think there is work being done there. It's how does that get, I guess, formalised? Maybe sounds like the wrong word because you want to be too formal, but how do you, I guess, legitimise that, fund that, sustain that, and like Nature Friendly Farm Work is a great example. The Water Innovation Network that we've done work with local councils in Northern Ireland. They've had specific farming innovation programs funded by the local council, which has been fantastic. And that again is to incentivise that, because that particular council lived in an area where so much of their economy relied on the local farming community. So it's how do we create, how do we look at those successful ecosystems and not copy it, but how do we adapt and find the bits that would work in the farm and innovation ecosystem? Because they all need that. They need the support organisations, you need the community organisations, you need the people, you need the champions like Helen who's done that and can speak about that experience. And that's all about how do we create a farm and innovation ecosystem to support those who are willing to take those chances and do those experiments. And I think that's really interesting, because actually I think the answer is much closer to what happens daily on a farm than people realise. Because we can learn so much from a natural ecosystem as to what an entrepreneurial ecosystem needs to be.
I think we need to also add, though, the kind of policy and support system needs to wrap around that now. So you do have great examples, as you rightly say, the work that NFFN's doing, Growing Innovation Network's doing, this, there's a lot of stuff happening there. We need now the wider support system to weigh in around that, in the same way that if we're working with students, they can apply for a Tech Start grant, for example, which is something that a small grant allows somebody to do a proof of concept, to say, I've got an idea, I think it might work, I don't know it's 100% going to work, but I want to try this, and there's a support mechanism there, and it's designed for those kind of higher risk businesses who are at a very early stage. I don't think we have an equivalent for, if I want to try a new crop, if I want to do something, if I want to grow flax, there's no mechanism in farming to support that.
Yeah, and as we're talking about that, I was thinking the spaces are there with the NFFN and Growing Innovation. There's farmers there inspiring each other. There's a real healthy culture of curiosity and experimentation that we see all the time. Yeah. So it goes back to that space to allow, to take the risk out when people are on the line of trying to keep themselves afloat financially and these problems and don't have the time or space or finance to be able to take just the wee slight bit of risk that we're talking about. We're not talking about changing the whole thing overnight. Yeah. So it would be great to see that sort of spill out into the farming world and help support that innovation. And I guess that comes back to what we value. And we've talked about this before, Helen, of local supply chains, and it would be so great to see value in that locally in terms of the resilience that it would bring for us, the food security, true food security, food sovereignty that we could get from a value of local supply chains. Yeah. And that's happening again. We see farmers that are doing that, but it'd be great to see a wider support for that.
That's a really key point, because we're so focused, all our measures are around export. Yeah. And that's important, but a huge value to our economy would be if we're able to produce our own stuff and eat it, great food, and keep it here and eat it. Substituting imports is very valuable for the economy as well, and has all those other benefits of, great, healthier, fresher food. So I think that shift in what we value, you're right, is really, really important.
It's about de-risking it. You've said it there, how do we remove as much risk as possible? And everybody thinks if you ask, give me some characteristics of an entrepreneur, they're risk takers. Actually, I disagree. I think they're incredible risk managers, and they know how far to go and how not, what not to do.
You're right.
And I think that is actually a measure, which again is naturally on a farm. Yeah. It's just applying that to a different challenge, I think. And the other thing there is about making it make sense. Until it makes sense and that's what I was saying earlier about it's only usually as a last resort innovation maybe seen as the sensible option, but actually it makes sense to start doing that further before that gets to that point. So how do you make it make sense? Because it's a revenue stream, it's more sustainable, it's better for the environment, it's better for the family. And once you start talking logic, I think, then innovation doesn't become this fluffy thing that's a nice thing to do when you get the time to do. It's actually pivotal to what would actually bring greater wealth and prosperity to the farm, to the family.
Yeah, and long-term resilience too, because of the opportunities.
And that's something that, we talk about resilience all the time in the innovation community and entrepreneurship community. That is something every farmer has in buckets, because they just have to be resilient. Yeah. There's just no other option. And I think that in itself is a core strength that leads well to innovation, because when you get your first no, when you fail your first time, you get up and you try it again in a different way.
So I think I want to go back to, we've talked a bit about food there, but I'd love to hear more about your drive to sustainable textiles, Helen, and maybe what's taken you there and how that journey's going, because that is a story of innovation that you're in the thick of, I suppose. So give us a run through about Malin Linen.
The starting point for Malin Linen is interesting, I suppose, when we're talking about innovation, because it was one of those, we were kind of scouting around for things that we could do differently on the farm, because it wasn't working. Exactly as you say, Chris, it was that last resort where we are tired. We're not farming in the way we would want to farm. We both have other jobs off farm. We'd love to be working all our time on the farm, but there's not enough money in the farm to do that. And we were just caught in that awful position. So it was absolutely out of necessity that I was sort of looking at it, how is this, the situation that we're in? How can we not make more money out of this? How can it not stack up with, this great asset that we've got? Surely there's a different way to do this. So, and we looked at all kinds of things. One of the first things I did was Google, what's the most profitable type of farming? That was a good starting point. But it is that thing of just kind of having a really open mind. And on my part, I think a lot of that was driven by sheer naivety and ignorance, and it's not a bad thing.
Nope.
And we see it all the time. Not knowing that much about a subject actually allows you to think more creatively, because you don't necessarily have the same baggage.
Yeah. I've heard that from some really successful people.
Yeah, I call it a naivety-driven innovation.
Yeah. Love that.
That's very much what
New
we
term
were
coined.
Yeah, I'm really good at it. So it genuinely was out of that kind of. We were scouting around for something. At the same time, my husband Charlie makes these beautiful bronze sculptures, and he was looking for linen bags to we were looking for linen bags to package them in. And there was this moment of, we realised that, and it's so obvious when you think about it, you're looking for linen and you're suddenly going, why do you not see linen in any field? Why do you never see flax growing here? And it hadn't really occurred to us before. And then we had one of those kind of, Charlie went, well, sure, we've a field. If we wanted to grow some flax, we could do that. And talk about lean launch, we just planted some flax.
But also utilising resources, there's so many resources available that people may not even know could be the resource or the source of a new value creation. Yeah. Oh,
absolutely. We were sitting there with the access to the land to do it, and it just seemed why would we not have a pun? Low risk, you see. Really, it was the price of the seed and the time it took us to plant it, and we thought that sure, what's the worst that can happen? And that is our absolute catchphrase from now on. It's what's the worst that can happen. And I often say that to students as well. We stop in our tracks from doing things because what will people think of us, or and if that's your concern, really rethink that, because why are you worrying about that? So asking ourselves what's the worst that could happen, and in that case we'll have wasted a bit of time and a tiny bit of money. We'll have learned something, had a bit of crack, and it just might work.
Make it make sense, that's the thing.
Yeah, so that was our kind of approach into linen. Had I known then what I know now, I might have gone down a different path. But as we've gone on, it has become the most amazing experience, because what we've realised is, first of all, we're not the only ones doing it, and the power of that collaboration is so important. When we first started it, I had this notion, well, we'll be the only ones doing it. That's really fantastic. What a position to be in. And then I thought, hold on, as soon as somebody else starts doing it, then we're not the only people doing it. And that's a really terrible position to be in. And then, what we've realised is it's so much bigger than us growing a field of flax. It's actually being part of a movement towards regenerative textiles. And that's global.
It is.
And there's thousands, hundreds of thousands of people all over the world working on it, and we're now part of that community that are all trying to make a big shift.
Elma's an instigator in that community and that movement here, absolutely, and is a fantastic example of like you've just shared there, the innovation on the farm, like it's incredible what you have achieved there.
I can't claim to be the first. Like there are so many other people who were hanging on to the industry and who kept it going, and who we went to visit loads of other people who had done bits and pieces, and just learned so much. And those people were in it because they thought it was important and they cared about it, and we got so much out of that, so I can't claim credit, I don't think. Thank you though.
Sometimes we worry about competition a lot in business, and you're thinking you want to be the only person doing it, but I guess to restart an industry or a new idea like that does require a wider ecosystem, like you've been mentioning, Chris, and I guess a critical mass to get that movement going. Yeah. So you're seeing that grow here now, but how do you think it could be sped up or improved or helped to continue to grow in the way that you would like to see?
Yeah, I suppose with, when we were starting, and had that kind of mad notion to plant a field of flax, and, we were able to just do that and have a go at it. But when we decided, actually, there's legs in this, and we realised there's actually a huge demand, because, we put up a wee bit of social media, and the response that we got into, people who are interested in the end product was phenomenal. So we had this little bit of traction, and I think at that point it would have been really good to be able to get some support for getting the equipment that we needed and all of that kind of stuff, which we've had to kind of bootstrap all on our own, and we've managed it. But that's taken 7 years. It could have been much quicker had we had a wee bit of do you know what? Even just the moral support, it would have made such a difference to us. Not just the money, but just somebody there going, yeah, have a punt at that. And that's what you get through those kind of tech start style, that kind of support. Mm-hmm. So I think the thing is, having that kind of open support where you've no idea what's going to come through the door. Some person in Tyrone's going to come up with the notion of reviving the flax industry. There's millions of other ideas out there, but you have to be open to whatever is going to come through your door. I think that's where you'll see true transformation in government. It's not government trying to guess, here's what we should be doing. I think it's just leaving the door for innovation wide open, so that allows that to happen out in the community, because the farmers are the ones who will come up with the best ideas. Mm-hmm. People on the land who are,
people who have experienced the problems.
Absolutely, and who are thinking all the time about what can I do, what can I do, what could I do. And if we had a system where I might come up with a bright idea of planting flax in a field and have somewhere I can go with that, I think that would just really transform things, Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it just comes back to an ecosystem that allows that space and allows that little bit of creativity and giving people an encouragement to fail and celebrate the journey.
Exactly.
Incentivising it and de-risking it, incentivising it and rewarding the outcomes, not the compliance within certain rules or boundaries. Yeah, absolutely.
It's something we see all the time as well, that we work with people who might start a business, try something, and it doesn't work. We for sure see them again.
Totally.
In another guise, because once you've been through that experience, when it's done in a way that's kind of celebrated, and the door is still open for you to come back, and you're not just going, that didn't work, away you go. You're actually...
But you'll have learned something too that can set you a completely different path, that can open another door. And I think if anybody's listening, to our conversation today, and I think one immediate action they could take, and it may sound that it's impossible to do, but it's setting aside an afternoon. Take an afternoon sometime in the next month, and just sit with your thoughts and sit with, what could we do differently? Do the blue sky thinking, and if that's one step that you can do, the thoughts that you have, the trains of thoughts that will take you, and that's a very easy starting place. It's risk free.
Fantastic.
Then ask, what's the worst that can happen?
Yeah, I think that's a perfect wrap up to what we're talking about here, and I hope anybody listening has been able to get something from it. We could talk all day, like it's just great. But I think we'll have to stop there and give thanks to Chris and Helen for joining me here, and we'll just mention again that this series will be coming out, and thanks to Danske Bank for supporting us here. And keep an eye out on our social media for farm walks and events where you'll be able to hear more about all the bright ideas that farmers are having in Northern Ireland.